I'm Jace Lacob, and you're listening to Masterpiece Studio. Audrey Hall, Mrs. Hall to most, is the heart of Skeldale House. She cooks a mean roast, bakes a delicious cake, and knows where all the best whiskey is hidden.
Oh my, what happened here?
I was trying to make you a surprise shepherd's pie supper, Mrs. H.
You haven't fought back.
But she also holds a tragic secret even closer to her own heart. Her only son, Edward, stole from a former employer, and her revelation of that crime sent Edward to prison and forever divided mother and son.
Not a day's gone by where I've not felt guilty for what I did.
The past can't be changed.
No, you're right. It can't be. But I felt far more guilty that you got in that position in the first place.
I don't understand.
Finally, after years of doubt and pain, Edward and Audrey meet again, in person. It's a devastating, beautiful reunion with powerful impacts for both of the Halls.
I didn't do it to punish you, I didn't. I thought it would fix the mistakes I'd made somehow. I'm sorry, Edward. I'm so sorry. I never stopped loving you.
Anna Madeley knew this would be a challenging episode when she first got the script, but she and the team behind the series gave her Audrey space to tell this emotional story properly. She returns to the podcast to reveal how they made it work. And this week, we are joined by All Creatures Great and Small star Anna Madeley. Welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to speak to you again.
So before we get into the specifics of this episode, I'm just curious, how did Ben Vanstone and the producers pitch this episode to you? Were there any conversations about it ahead of getting this script and reading it?
The idea of meeting Edward has sort of gone in and come out at various different points, and this felt like the right time with everything else that's going on in the world, with the, and the what is in the background, the war, but it's becoming more and more part of their lives during this series. And that gave us that opportunity to play that storyline with Edward. They didn't talk to me a huge amount before it, other than that they were very, very excited about it. And then when we got the script, this episode was actually written by a new writer called Karim Khan, and he just wrote the most beautiful episode. It's absolutely stunning on the page, and it lifted beautifully onto the set. And so it was really exciting. And I think because we've spent quite a lot of time now with Mrs. Hall and we've got a bit of history, it was really lovely to then finally get to meet him and to explore that relationship and what had gone wrong and what the possibilities of it might be. It was a point of great excitement, I think, for everybody, and a very special one. I remember when we were working on set, the crew as well, everybody sort of knew it was a really, really special piece of writing. So it was wonderful to get to play it.
I mean, you said it's sort of stunning on the page, and to me, episode 5, Edward, is just such an exquisite piece of television, and the Audrey scenes almost function as a short film within the overall narrative. So when you first got the script for this episode and read it through, what was that initial reaction when you got to the final page?
Oh, it's sort of in pieces. It's complicated because there's me as a person just reading it and my response to it. It's so beautiful and moving and complex and really stunning. And then me, the actor, read it and was thrilled. I mean, what a privilege to have something like that written for your character, and then slightly daunted that it was so good that it was slightly nerve-wracking then to go on set to film it. So the build up to actually doing it, I remember feeling quite nervous about that I wanted to do it justice because it was such a good piece of writing. And I just think it's really wonderful to get those layers of Mrs. Hall. It felt very true, very unsentimental, and they were just really fun scenes to dig into. He managed to put in so many layers. That's why he's so brilliant, and they're such a great team. When Ben Vanstone and Melissa Gallant put together the arc for the series, there's so much care has gone into that. And then it just means you've got so much to play with as an actor. It's really wonderful. So yeah, I was both in bits and very excited and slightly scared.
Well, no, I'm glad you say that because I would imagine it would be particularly daunting. I mean, this is largely an Audrey Hall episode. She is, we'll say, maybe a somewhat restrained character much of the time, but there is so much emotion in this episode, both emotion that's expressed and emotion that is repressed within this episode. So I'm not surprised that there was some sort of trepidation about carrying this episode. Can you be sort of specific about, was there a moment, a scene, or was it just the overall feeling that, as you said, sort of felt daunting?
You know, once you get stuck into something and once you start working on it, it's always fine. It's when, I guess, the anticipation of it before you can actually get there to do it. And that was sort of the period where I felt a bit nervous. Once I was on set doing it, it's fine. And I think also because Karim Khan's writing was so accurate and true to Mrs. Hall that it was then, you know, when someone's able to find her voice like that so well, that it does so much for you and it lifts off the page and you can just enjoy playing it. So once you start, it's always okay, I think.
I mean, there is a vulnerability and unease to Audrey in the early scenes of this episode that are somewhat unlike her. And she nearly leaves after waiting, it seems, sort of endlessly for Edward to turn up. What sort of direction did Andy Hay provide in terms of the tone of these scenes?
Well, we did talk it through beforehand a little bit, and he made a decision that Connor Dean, who came in to play Edward, who was just lovely, he kept us apart as actors. I think he wanted to keep that sense of, you know, even though these two people know each other really well, there's also, because of this estrangement, there's this distance between them. And I think he really wanted to have that awkwardness of the unfamiliarity of somebody, even though on the one hand, you know them very well. On the other hand, he's now a young man arriving in naval uniform. And so I think that sense of not knowing quite what you're walking into, of feeling hopeful, but also a little anxious, trying to do the right thing by her little boy at the same time as this young man appears. We just wanted to have all those layers in it and not have any preconceived idea really of how that day was going to play out for her. She's had so many disappointments, I think, with Edward before. And, you know, we've seen her reach that point of saying, he knows where I am, you know, he wants me, he knows where to find me, that she's had to reach that conclusion because she's just putting herself in pain every time she reaches out and gets nothing back. So I think for me, it was that measure of how excited does she allow herself to be at the same time as accepting the fact that it may happen again. And we sort of know this, I think, about Mrs. Hall, that her heart will be open to it and she'll want to believe it, and it will be hard to accept that if it doesn't work out, but she'll be hopeful again. So I just think it was perhaps slightly heightened this time in terms of having the war in the background. I wonder whether that perhaps makes it feel like it might be more likely to happen. But yeah, it was a sort of careful calibration, I suppose, of those, of the hope versus the cold reality of what it's been like in the past. It was like that all the way through, I think, of just all those different layers of their relationship, sort of in terms of Andy, just partly steering that and just those fine points about when she gives up. So when she gave up at the clock, watching the clock go, and at what point do you finally say, okay, I've had enough? When she resigns herself to it, you know, telling those story beats. Andy was really great at helping find all of those small but, you know, very significant moments. And he was wonderful also at shaping it through the station, because on the page certain things happened in different places. And once we were filming at Keighley Station, where they have the old trains run on one track, and then bizarrely on the other side of the track there's all the modern train. And so he choreographed it really beautifully using the tunnel there and the tea room and the waiting. It was all of that really helped in telling that story physically as well as the emotional side of it.
And we experience Audrey's nervousness through her exchange with Penny, played by Lara Stewart, who even amid the chaos of the train station senses Audrey's anxiety here. In these small moments, these two women form a brief bond.
You changed your mind?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Did you miss your train?
No, I'm waiting for someone.
Who?
No, that's not why I'm here. Are the trains late?
Sometimes. I'm sure they're on their way.
Yes, I hope you're right. Please, yes.
Is that for them?
Yes.
What's their name?
It's, Edward.
Edward.
Edward, that's right, yeah. He's my son. My son, Bubby.
Son.
Son? All right.
What do these Audrey-Penny scenes mean to you, and how does Audrey read Penny's kindness here?
I think she's really grateful for it. It's a really lovely moment where she spots her and offers her some tea. I think it's a very warm, kind thing to do. It's the sort of thing Mrs. Hall would probably do, to have someone who's noticed, someone who's not being intrusive. She's not butting in, but she's just noticed and is doing something kind. I think that's really lovely, and it makes the day a little bit exciting to have somebody ask, well, who are you meeting and what's happening? I think it gives Mrs. Hall a sort of moment to be a little bit excited about the prospect of meeting Edward, someone who doesn't know the history and just thinks, oh, how lovely, you're going to meet your son. I think for a moment that's, it's a lovely, normal, exciting thing to have happening. And it's a very sweet journey that then she helps her out, shows her somewhere she can go to have that chat. It's the kindness of a stranger, I suppose, isn't it? Of someone who's noticed, but sort of understand what you need in that moment. I think Mrs. Hall's used to being that person more than she's used to getting it. So I think it's she is very touched by that kindness from Penny.
Before this next question, a brief word from our sponsors. Immersive cultural enrichment on board and on shore. Freshly prepared regional cuisine. Viking sails the rivers of the world and takes travelers to the heart of iconic destinations. Discover more at Viking.com. The blocking in this episode is brilliant. There's a two-shot of you and Connor Dean, who plays Edward, and you're sitting on either side of the central line of the screen, marking this sort of physical and emotional chasm between your characters. What did you make of the blocking choices that Andy made in the luggage room scenes?
I really liked it. It was really important to have that journey where these two people couldn't sit opposite each other yet. So it was important that they had that space to be able to both sort of look out and not be intimidated by staring straight at each other. And I think it gave the audience, the train station is a working station behind, so it gives that sense of time, and there are trains coming and going and people coming and going, and they've just got this small, quiet moment. The clock is ticking on. And things like Connor, the choice he dropped his bag down between them. There's definitely a sense that at the beginning that he wants to be there on the one hand, but on the other hand, he's angry with his mom and he has questions, and he's quite a young man who I think probably finds it quite difficult to know how to have these conversations. So they have to find their way to one another. I think, people often say that, don't you, when having a difficult conversation, don't try and sit opposite each other, go for a walk or do something where you can be side by side, you can have your thoughts and your a bit of space. And I think that really worked for that scene, that these two they've made it into a room together, but they've a journey to go on. And you see that through the episode as well, that, they go and get a cup of tea and then they start to have a more confrontational conversation as it goes on, that they need to have to get past as it goes on. So all those things, they really matter in terms of how you're playing it. They add a whole nother layer to the relationship and how close you're allowed to get somebody, him keeping his hat on, eventually taking his hat off, her being allowed to physically be comforting to him, put her hand on his head, notice that his hair's been cut for military service. He's her little boy at the same time as he's his young man going off to war. I think the physicality of it is really important for how you see the evolution of their relationship through that episode.
It's a great sort of negotiation of space, as you say, as they sort of negotiate their way through this physical space. They are sort of negotiating their emotional intimacy. And as you say, as he sort of puts his bag down between them and there's a gap between them. And by the end of the episode, they have managed to sort of form a tentative sort of renewed bond in their sort of physical space. And it's just such beautiful acting that we see that manifests so physically on screen. And it, to me, makes the episode so much deeper than if they had, as you say, sort of met up for tea and they're sitting across from one another and it's just a stilted conversation. But that physical negotiation sort of makes the episode, I think.
Oh, thank you. Because I think also what I liked was that it wasn't easy, that it is a hard journey that they've got to go on together. It's not a simple. They've got a complicated history together. I think sort of with the foundation of love in there and care, but they just don't understand what's happened to them. So yes, it was really important that journey wasn't slight, that it wasn't sort of simply done. It cost them both to be there and to do that. And that actually that will make it better in the future, having gone through that.
I mean, he does come into the conversation sort of in a very sort of childish, spiteful way, refusing the biscuits that Audrey had baked him, which to me felt so sort of rotten and cruel. But as much as the biscuits are sort of this peace offering, they're also symbolic of this earlier time in their friendship. It's sort of nostalgia brought to life.
You must be ravenous. Here, how are these?
I had a sandwich before I left.
Well, a sandwich don't fill you up.
It did me. I've got no appetite left.
Well, there's always room for something sweet. That's what you used to say. Remember? Look inside. Go on, open it up.
You shouldn't have gone to so much trouble.
You used to like them.
I still do. Sometimes.
Well, you can take them with you for the trip, if you like. You don't need to eat them now.
My bag's full to the brim.
And it almost seems like his attempt to sort of refuse it is sort of refusing to look back on any of their past happiness in that moment. I mean, for Audrey, is she trying to bring those happy memories back to life for herself, to remind Edward of that time, or both? What is she hoping to achieve, or is it just a simple sort of kind gesture to her son?
I think on one level it's a simple kind gesture, and she knows he likes them, and she's sent him shortbread before. I wonder whether it's one of those things that you know to do. You know that person likes that, so you hope it will be. She just tries again, slightly driving herself mad, I suppose, trying again and again. But I think it brings up an interesting dynamic in terms of, I feel she's missed her little boy, and the shortbread is something that her little boy liked. her little boy who had trouble making new friends, or, you know, I think all those lovely memories of getting to be his mum and look after him and see him blossom, she's really missed. And I think this young man comes along who's about to have to do a very, very grown-up thing in his life. And so they sort of sit in conflict, I suppose. And there is a bit of him that I think is being a little bit cruel towards her over it. But I think she can take it as well, because she's his mum. You know, that thing where in family you think kids do that, don't they? And it's okay because you can get through it and get past it and apologise and then move forward. So I think they become quite a lovely, they're a well-meant gesture that by the end is well received. Does she look back with slightly rose-tinted specs on her little boy, but then he's like, no, he wants to deal with the difficult stuff. He wants to have those conversations, I think. So,
and those conversations, it does happen. Like, they do finally discuss the sort of massive elephant in the room that Audrey turned her son into the police for stealing from her employer, which is something that Edward really can't wrap his head around.
No one really knew who I was when I started, so I could pretend to be someone good, which is nice, I suppose.
You are someone good. Look at me. Edward Hall. I've always seen the good in you.
Then why did you give me to police? Did you see the good in me then?
Yes. I always have. I did that for your own good.
For my own good?
I know it didn't seem like it at the time. Or now either.
Boss still ruined me.
I know it were hard.
It took away all the good I had left. All the good you saw in me then, it's all gone.
No, it ain't. You're stronger than you think.
No, it has. And you did that to me.
What did Audrey hope to achieve by having him sent to Borstal?
Gosh, I mean, when she describes it on the rundown, it sounds like it wasn't something she had a huge amount of time to think about, but that her sense of what was right and wrong was really strong. And I think the idea that it would be doing him any kind of a favour to not make him face consequences for his actions, he did a wrong thing, I suppose, and she couldn't see another way around that. I don't think it was her intention for him to have a really terrible time at the same time as he needed to face consequences for what he did, and she needed to do something that sat well with her conscience. It's you know, if she hadn't done that, I think it would have weighed on her, and she'd have then herself have done something bad in her view, I think. So I think she acted with integrity, but I don't think, you know, his desire to be always protected by his mum doesn't mean that she should always, you know, protect him from the consequences of his acts. It's a complicated one, and it's another thing where it's like he has to grow up a bit and realize, you know, his mum can't make all things better for him, and he can and he can't blame her for it. I think it's a complicated one, and I think she will always feel bad about it at the same time as she made the best decision she could at the time.
I mean, is this then the moment that she needed with Edward, the chance to explain, to make amends? Is this what she hoped to achieve in this meeting?
I don't know if she went into it necessarily consciously hoping to be able to say that to him, but I think that's the thing at the end of the day that gives her the relief to be able to say, I have actually said what I wanted to say. And he can go away knowing that, you know, the idea that he thought she might have done a mean thing on purpose, or that she didn't love him, or that she wasn't constantly thinking about him or caring about him, I think that to her is absolutely heartbreaking. I think it really matters to her that he knows that he's loved by her. And so yeah, I don't know that it was necessarily a sort of pre-planned idea to be able to say that, but I think when she sits down at the end of the day with a cup of tea, that's the thing that will bring her comfort, is that they were able to exchange their feelings for one another.
Audrey tries to hold on to Edward, and he slips out of her arms. He says he'll take the biscuits in the end, but he ends up accidentally dropping them. And then he's shouting something, but Audrey can't hear his words. How tricky was this sequence to film with, as you say, sort of that ticking clock element inside that deep emotion?
It was technically quite hard, because the movement of it, they were running down the platform, we came running down the slope, we were running towards a train that had to be timed to leave the station while we played through that sequence. So it was technically, we had to be sort of spot on with that. But in terms of the emotion, I think because the writing was so good and it felt that those scenes really built to that in a way that it felt quite easy on the journey to then go there. Andy does this wonderful thing where he's, as much as he can, he'll film in sequence. So you have the journey in the right order where you can, and especially for something like this, that was really, really helpful. You can't always do it for practical reasons, but that was great. And so it allows you to feed that in. You know, we didn't film that scene on day one and then go back to the other stuff. So we had the history of those scenes with us to then take into that moment. And also sometimes the ticking clock and the, you know, worrying about the train and the time and all of that, the energy that you get from that is something that you can really use in terms of, this is true for these characters. This train is about to go. Things have got to be said. A door's got to be open and shut. Someone's got to get on the train. I've got to try and grab a hug in there if I can. It's, you know, the reality of it helps with playing their reality. And also, yeah, and we were up against the clock. You know, you've only got the day you have on the station to film. So sometimes those things can work in your favor to, you know, that you have that experience is what you need for the scene. So yeah, they're challenging, and it, you know, there are times where I'd sort of take myself off and shut my eyes and stay away from the hubbub of the sort of, I guess, the sort of behind the scenes element of it, so I could stay focused on what I was doing. You know, you always really appreciate the sensitivity of the crew in those times where they understand that you just need to concentrate on what you can't cut and have a chat about something in between. And especially say with your makeup artist or someone who knows, you know, you need to concentrate on something for a while, then they know when to leave you be and when to be present, and that's, you know, that's an amazing skill. So yeah, and that's one of the benefits as well. We've had familiar crew throughout, that, you know, as our third series with a lot of the same people, and you can build those relationships with them. It's really, really great. So it was challenging in a really fun way. You know, it's the juice of those scenes, wanting to do it well. It was, yeah, I'd always say it was enjoyable, if that didn't sound a bit odd, given what the scene's like. But yeah, as an actor, it was a good challenge. I really enjoyed filming it.
I mean, I have sobbed watching that scene every single time, and I've seen it now many, many times, and it reduces me to tears every time. Audrey can't hear Edward's final words, which are sort of delivered with almost wild desperation. But Penny is there, and she reads Edward's lips and says that he said, "I love you, Ma."
What did you say, Edward? I can't hear you. Say it again. What is it? Edward.
I love you, Ma. He said, I love you, Ma.
What does this moment mean to Audrey? Is it a revelation in a way?
I think it is. It is surprising, but it's also a relief. It's also wonderful. It's also, oh my God, he's managed to say that as he's leaving the station. It's sort of an imperfect, perfect thing to happen. It's, I sort of adored it because it felt, having got to know Edward that bit better, it felt like such an Edward way to sort of put it out at that moment. They'd have said it earlier, or it was so endearing. I sort of loved him more for that, the sort of chaos of it, and that it wasn't this sweet moment where they could exchange that and have a hug, that she's left on the station hearing it, and it's wonderful to hear. And it's also, and this is what a slight urge to hug Penny. It was that thing of feeling, you know, it was the moment for a hug, but he's not there, he's on a train.
No, it's been this sort of pressure cooker sequence of sequences, really, in which all this emotion is sort of built up and it's finally released, but it has nowhere to go. So, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Eat some shortbread. Have a cup of tea.
Ben Vanstone and the writers have very sort of slowly and deliberately doled out Audrey's past, giving us clues over these past 3 series, and then giving Audrey this sort of inner life that the Mrs. Hall of the original All Creatures wasn't given. How rewarding has it been to see Audrey be given the rich complexity that she deserves as a character?
Oh, I love it. It's for me, it's really made the experience of doing this that they've put that care and attention and detail into who she is, her psychology, her backstory, who she is, and how she's come here, and why the things that matter to her do, and they've given her real integrity as a character, and so she's allowed to be flawed and funny and get things wrong, and also she is that heart of gold who is that moral center to the household, and it's really rich and rewarding. It's when you get those beautiful scripts, it's a real privilege to get to play them and have your input and collaborate on them. It's I really love it, and it's interesting sort of as we go on. It does get richer, and you start to get to know them as people with a history. You can refer back to something that happened a few years ago between the characters. I've not had that experience before. It's it becomes complicated and a memory task, but it's really worth it because you get those rich layers of their relationships with each other as they evolve, as the stories evolve, and as they evolve as people. It's incredibly rewarding and fun. It's she's a really fun character to play in the midst of all those other guys. I think it's that's all. I'm smiling.
I can hear the smile. I mean, I love in this episode that she comes home. Siegfried says to Audrey,
How was it?
Well, I don't know how to explain it, really. We're all too brief. Over before I knew it. And yet, the very ground beneath me feels like it's shifted. I feel lighter.
He's finally realised how much you care.
Oh, I don't know. I hope so.
I don't think any of us know quite how to express our gratitude to you, Mrs. Hall. Believe me.
Does Audrey feel loved in this moment between Tristan tidying the house and making her a shepherd's pie and a cup of tea, Edward's final words, and Siegfried acknowledging how much they owe to her? Is this sort of the pinnacle of happiness for Mrs. Hall in this moment?
Oh, I think so, yeah. I think also it's probably a little bit overwhelming. Absolutely. I think it's a moment that she will cherish, to feel acknowledged and feel loved and taken care of. It's she's not often made a cup of tea, but that they recognize that she needs that and that they're there to be her cushion. Yeah, really matters. Really, I think that's incredibly meaningful to her, and just lovely. You sort of think, for a woman who does her best to care for everybody and is so careful with her relationships, that she puts a lot into them. They really are what make her tick. It's that they are really important. To know that that's received well, and that there's love coming the other way, I think I think that sort of means everything to her. Yeah, it's probably a moment where she can breathe and fall asleep very easily.
And finally, there are 2 episodes left of All Creatures Great and Small this season. What can you tease about what might be coming up in these final 2?
Oh, gosh. I think the war comes into play, sort of the screws tighten on it a little bit further, and it starts to impact on their lives I think it starts to happen to everybody throughout the series, but very much towards the end of who matters to you and what matters to you and what are you going to put your energy into at this time. And it's sort of the reveal, I think, for Mrs. Hall, the reveal of when you take away all your thinking and you just act on instinct, what happens? It's quite it's quite a fun idea to see someone who drops their guard because life's just thrown them a curveball and they have to respond. And we have a lovely Christmas. We have a new addition to the household at Christmas who brings a lot of joy to everybody, brings a sort of cultural exchange and gives us all a sense of hope and joy. And we have a very grumpy Santa. And yeah, big decisions and big love and and a very happy Christmas.
Very well teased. Anna Madeley, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
We're back to Victorian England again next time with the long-awaited other side of Miss Scarlet and the Duke himself.
It's possible that one of these groups has been following me and seen who I associate with.
I'd hardly call Moses one of your associates.
He's regularly worked for Mr. Nash, who in turn has worked for me several times this year.
Several?
I just go where the money is.
Stuart Martin joins the podcast to dissect the Season 3 finale of Miss Scarlet and the Duke, February 12th. Masterpiece Studio is hosted by me, Jace Lacob, produced by Nick Anderson, and edited by Robin Bissett. Alicia Baitup is our sound designer. The executive producer of Masterpiece is Suzanne Simpson.